Imagine being able to take any image, a child's drawing, a customer's logo, or even a photo from your phone, and easily turn it into a beautiful embroidery design. That's the power of digitizing. Hi, I'm John Deere, the world's most awarded embroidery digitizer, and welcome to Embroidery Legacy's Embroidery Digitizing 101 course. If this is your first attempt at learning how to digitize, congratulations, you've just saved yourself a lot of time, frustration, and confusion. And if you've tried before and struggled, don't worry, you're not alone and it's not your fault. There's a ton of conflicting advice out there, often from unqualified people who truly don't understand the craft. It's easy to feel overwhelmed or wonder if you're even capable of learning this. But I promise you, I've heard this thousands of times before, and you can learn how to digitize. You just need someone to teach you the right way, and most importantly, you need to be given the one key that unlocks all the secrets: Digitizing Theory. As a fourth-generation embroiderer, I began my career as a digitizer at the age of 17 in my grandparents' factory by apprenticing to become a Shiftly digitizer. Now, in case you're wondering what that means, it means I learned how to digitize or create designs manually one stitch at a time on this machine right here. To date, I'm the last Shiftly master digitizer still alive and teaching in the embroidery world. Over the last 40 years, I've worked with dozens of Fortune 500 companies like Disney, Coca-Cola, and yes, ironically, even John Deere. I've been fortunate to win over 30 awards commercially and teach tens of thousands of embroiderers just like you how to digitize and create custom designs. Now, before we jump in, there's one thing I want to make absolutely clear. Digitizing is both an art and a science. It's not just about clicking buttons in the software, it's about understanding how thread, fabric, and needles interact with the real world. This knowledge goes back over a century, long before software ever existed. Today's software gives you the tools, but the theory, the time-tested rules and principles behind how embroidery works, that's what tells you how to use the tools properly. These two elements, software and theory, are two pieces of a puzzle. On their own, they're incomplete, but when you bring them together, that's when you unlock the ability to create beautiful, professional quality embroidery. And here's the best part: even if you never plan to digitize a design from scratch, learning this theory will still make you a far better embroiderer. You'll start to see embroidery differently. You'll start to understand why designs work or why they don't. You'll be able to catch and prevent common issues like distortion, gaps, puckering, or misaligned outlines before you press the start button on your machine. And once you know what's really happening under the needle, you'll never look at embroidery the same way again. Here's what this course will cover: what is digitizing, the three main stitch types and when to use them, how density affects your stitch outs, what underlay does and why it matters, why designs distort and how to fix them, understanding registration, pathing or mapping, and fabric recipes. Before we begin, and to get the most out of this course, make sure you download your free printable Digitizing 101 PDF cheat sheet. It's a handy resource to follow along and to keep by your machine. If you're watching this on YouTube, just click the link below to enroll for free and grab your cheat sheet from our website. By the end of this course, you'll walk away with a solid foundation in digitizing fundamentals, so let's dive in. So what is digitizing? Quite simply put, digitizing is the process in which you use your software and the tools within that software to create an embroidery design that runs on a machine. The trick is to make the design so that it's production friendly and so that it doesn't have unnecessary jumps and trims, as well as ensuring that the machine runs smoothly. Promoting soft embroidery is the key. You do not want to have stitch-intensive designs that cause thread breaks, bird's nests, and disastrous results. Now, with regards to the basic rules for the three main stitch types, the first one we're going to cover is the running stitch. The running stitch is the foundational stitch that all others are built on. It's the most simple, but it's the one that gives you the most creativity. I use the running stitch whenever I'm doing a lot of fine detail in embroidery designs or I'm trying to create things that look realistic. Now, with a running stitch, there's really only one main thing that you can control, and that's the stitch length, the space between the penetrations of a needle as it's going in and out of the fabric. It's very important that you understand the minimum and maximum stitch lengths for the running stitch. The minimum stitch length I would ever want to create on an embroidery machine is 0.5 millimeters. If you go under 0.5 millimeters, you're essentially telling the machine that it's sewing in the same place over and over again. This will produce stitch-intensive designs as well as actually cause thread breaks. Now, we can move up a little from there to 1 millimeter, and 1 millimeter is kind of the safe zone. If I have 0.5 millimeters as the red zone and I go up to 1 millimeter as the orange zone, and then I can go up to 1.5 as the green zone. As I'm digitizing designs, I try to ensure that most of my stitch penetrations are at least 1 millimeter to 1.5 millimeters apart from each other, which promotes smooth running embroidery designs that will not become stitch intensive. Now that we've covered the minimums, let's talk about the maximum stitch lengths you'd ever want to use for a running stitch. And I'll be honest, there's two different answers. It depends on whether you're using them on a wearable item or whether it's going to be on a non-wearable item. If you have long stitches on a jacket and you lean up against a brick wall, you could actually have those stitches snagged. So if I'm doing embroidery on a wearable item, I always try to keep my stitch lengths between 5 to 7 millimeters in length. If it's a non-wearable item, something that I'm going to be hanging on a wall, I can go anywhere from 7 to 12.1 millimeters. Now just remember, you can't go over 12.1 because most machines today have trimmers, and the trimmers will automatically activate if they see a stitch length over 12.1 millimeters. And then you'll create something called invisible embroidery. Now with regards to the basic rules of a satin stitch, it's kind of similar to a run stitch. You want to make sure that you don't overstep the rules of how long the stitch becomes. I wouldn't want to try to do a stitch 0.5 millimeters in width because it will sink into the fabric and disappear. So I always try to have at least 1 millimeter of space between the stitches going back and forth and making penetrations. On some fabrics, a 1 millimeter stitch will still disappear, like if you're embroidering on terry cloth or Serpa fleece. So about 1.5 is usually within the safety zone, and again you can go up to 5 to 7 millimeters for a wearable item and 7 to 12 millimeters for a non-wearable item. The other things you can control within a satin stitch are the directions of the stitch or the inclinations when you're creating the objects, as well as the space between the stitches, which is called density. Density is meant to be changed based on the width of the stitch as well as the fabric type you'll be embroidering on. With regards to the fill stitch, the rules fundamentally change as opposed to the running and the satin stitch with regards to stitch length. You never really want to have a short stitch length within a fill because fills are meant to cover large areas. If you have too many short stitches and you run the embroidery on your machine, and then you launder the item, when it comes out of the dryer, you're going to see the fills doing a little bit of a wave. It's going to look a little bit like a roller coaster, and that's because there's just too many stitch penetrations in a small area. So I never like to see under a 4 millimeter stitch length when I'm creating fills. Anywhere between 4 to 6 millimeters is generally good. You can also control the random effects, so some fills look nice and smooth while others will have more texture, and you can also utilize pattern fills, which are preset into most software programs. So what exactly is density? Now we did touch on it when we were going over the 3 stitch types, but density is basically the space between each stitch. And that space does vary depending on a few factors. The normal density that you'll find in most software programs is 0.4 millimeters of space between each stitch. That's just a little bit larger than the width of a thread, so it looks like you have full coverage when it's embroidered on a garment. But sometimes you might need more or less density in a design, and that really depends on the fabric type. If you're embroidering on vinyl or leather, you'll need less density in that design because too many penetrations will literally cut through the leather or the vinyl. If you have something like Serpa fleece or terry cloth, you'd actually need more density because there's such a high pile that you'll need to add a little bit more to cover the fabric. The other key factor is density is meant to be changed, and this is one of the main reasons why you see so many what I like to call bulletproof or stitch intensive designs available in the industry. I've seen so many people when they're learning how to digitize just go with the 0.4 default density and they never change it. They start digitizing layer upon layer on top of each other with the same density, and you're putting full coverage on full coverage. All it's going to do is create a bulletproof design. As you start building up the layers or colors within your embroidery design, you want to start reducing the density of each layer that you're building upon. Because embroidery should be soft and flexible, feeling like it's part of the fabric that it was embroidered on, not feeling like it's stiff or it's been glued onto the garment. Understanding underlay is one of the most important things to know as a digitizer, because underlay is one of those things that you don't see, but it plays the most important role. It's laying a foundation within the embroidery design. Now there are many different types of underlay within digitizing programs. You can have center run underlay, edge run, zigzag or double zigzags. You can even have zigzags with edge runs to combine underlays that are all interacting with each other. They all serve a purpose. Within a satin stitch, you might need a center run underlay if the satin stitch is very thin. And as that satin stitch gets wider, you might need a zigzag, or you might need an edge run to create a break wall. All of them work together to provide a stable foundation for your stitches. The idea behind underlay is that it secures the area underneath the stitches and acts as a break wall to help the visual stitches look clean. It impacts stitches that you visually see and gives you a foundation to build on. Underlays for fill stitches usually run the opposite direction of the fill. They secure the fabric first and provide a foundation for the fill to sit on, which reduces distortion within the design. Understanding distortion can be one of the most difficult things for new digitizers to figure out. What happens is they see their designs on a computer screen and it looks absolutely perfect, and then they run it on their machines and they don't see the same results. The main reason this distortion happens is because an embroidery machine works on the principles of tension. You have a top thread that works on the principles of tension, and you have a bobbin thread that is drawing tension as well, which is how we create a flat stitch. As the tension pulls, it creates a flat stitch, and if you look at my fingers, and if you imagine that my fingers are actual stitches, the direction of my fingers will pull with the tension of the machine, and that's called pull compensation. The wider the stitch, the more it pulls in, and the pull compensation is something that is built into the software program. You can adjust the amount of pull compensation within a design based on the width of the stitch as well as the fabric type. Now there's another culprit at play, and this one's not necessarily built into most software programs. It's something called push compensation. Now push compensation happens on the open ends of an embroidery design. Now the easiest way I found to explain this is with a tube of toothpaste. Now this toothpaste does have an open end, and the open end, if my fingers again are stitches and it starts to pull in, as it pulls, the toothpaste comes out of the open end, and that's the exact same principle that happens with embroidery. Those open ends at the top of the bottom of letters, like the letter I, it'll pull in the direction of the stitches and it pushes out on the top and bottom of the open ends. Getting a handle on distortion becomes easier to control as you learn theory and digitizing principles. Now this is a perfect example of distortion and how it affects a design. Incorrect registration, as you can see, has all kinds of areas where the black running stitch is not lining up to the satin or fill areas. The other is an example of perfect registration where everything lines up perfectly. Improper use of underlay can play a factor, but this is most often linked to not pathing or mapping your design properly. Every design should be carefully planned out. If you're a seasoned embroiderer, I'm sure you've seen designs running on your machine that make no sense. They're sporadically stitching from one place to the next and jumping and trimming all over the place. Even though you might not be a digitizer, you know the person who created that design had no idea what they were doing. When a digitizer knows what they're doing, they know how to look at all the objects in the same way you'd look at a floor plan. Everything we do in life has a logical plan. Even something like vacuuming a house, we have a starting point and an ending point, and we logically go from room to efficiently complete our task. Randomly jumping from room to room without a plan is just a waste of time. Digitizing embroidery designs uses the same principles. You want to look at your design and figure out the best and most efficient way to create machine-friendly designs. With regards to color changes, if a qualified digitizer knows what they're doing, sometimes there'll be extra color changes within a design. And if they know what they're doing, those extra color changes are meant to be there to promote good registration, preventing you from not getting too far ahead of yourself. You're finishing segments as you move forward. So I don't always think that extra color changes in a design are a negative thing if the digitizer knows what they're doing. But trims, that's a completely different story. Unnecessary trims are one of the worst culprits in embroidery, and if you have a design that has 100 unnecessary trims, that calculates into lost time on your embroidery machine. When an embroidery machine has to perform a trim command, it needs to slow down, tie off, stop, activate the trimmers, cut, then it jumps over, it ties in, and it starts to go again at slow speed. And then it ramps up and continues embroidering. Now if you were to time out how many stitches you actually lose on every trim, it's approximately 120 stitches, which means that if you have 100 unnecessary trims in a design, that's like adding 12,000 stitches of lost production time. So trims do matter, and that's why digitizing is all about taking all of these rules into consideration and learning the theory for creating designs so embroidery runs smoothly on your machine. The goal is to create soft, visually appealing designs with good pathing, correct underlay, sufficient density, and minimal trims that run efficiently on your machine. Think of embroidery recipes like cooking recipes, but for your embroidery software. They actually generate the proper settings we've discussed, like underlay, pull compensation, and density. You just pick the recipe based on the fabric type you plan to embroider on, and the software will automatically apply the appropriate property settings. Our Embroidery Legacy software has multiple recipes built right in, so if you want to switch your design from sweatshirt to a towel, just change the recipes at the click of a button. I hope by now you can see why understanding digitizing theory is so important, not just for creating your own custom designs, but for getting professional embroidery results, period. Using software without theory is just like using a calculator without understanding math. Sure, you can press buttons, but without the fundamentals, things won't add up. This is exactly where most other digitizing education falls short. They show you how to use tools, but not why you use them. Now, if you're ready to keep learning and start creating designs that actually stitch out the way you imagined, here's what I recommend. First, if you already own embroidery software that you enjoy using, and you want to just take what you've learned even further, I highly recommend enrolling in our non-software specific Digitizing Theory for Beginners course. This course dives deeper into the core principles behind creating beautiful embroidery designs with real-world examples, easy to follow lessons, and bonus exercises to help it all stick. Second, if you don't have software, I invite you to try our game-changing new Embroidery Legacy Digitizing software. After teaching over 100,000 embroiderers around the world, I've seen how traditional software often gets in the way of creativity with overwhelming interfaces and steep learning curves. That's why I partnered with one of the industry's top developers to create a smarter solution, one that simplifies digitizing without sacrificing quality. You'll be able to create beautiful designs faster and easier than ever before, so you can finally focus on creativity, not complexity. Whether you grab the Theory for Beginners course or try our game-changing new EL software, you'll get access to premium training you won't find anywhere else. Remember, any software is only as good as the education behind it, so whether you're looking to create custom designs, make a little extra income, or simply take your embroidery to the next level, click one of the links below and let's keep learning together.